Welcome back to the Roadside Rescue YouTube channel. I'm Ernest, and on this episode, I'm going to talk about heating problems. It's that time of year where people really start to notice that they have heating problems. This last week, I had more than one person reach out to me saying that their car wouldn't heat up. My truck itself has some issues heating up now that it's winter time. I happen to be holding the problem. I know what the issue is with mine, but I'm going to talk about all the different possible issues your car might have, why it's not warming up. I'll talk about what each one of those symptoms looks like. And all of these things should be pretty easy to fix by yourself, so let's get started. I'll do another video in the future talking about overheating issues. This video here is specifically going to reference heating up issues. There could be a bunch of different things that cause that. In the case of my truck, I took the thermostat out this summer because it was overheating in the dead of the summer when it was over 100 degrees outside. Okay, so first off, let's talk about what's going on with your vehicle when it's heating up. The motor should be heating up. And in the cooling system, typically the highest thing up in the cooling system is the heater core, and that's what's going to heat up the inside of your car. Now, when I have people reach out to me and they say, hey, my car doesn't heat up for a long time until I really get moving, or it doesn't heat up at all, then that's a pretty good indication to me that they might be low on coolant. Since that heater core is the highest thing in the system, when the coolant gets low, the coolant doesn't go through the heater core and it never warms up the inside of the car. Or maybe once you start getting going fast, then it'll push the fluid fast enough to actually get up into the heater core. So if you've noticed that you're turning on your car and it takes forever to warm up inside and the motor itself is warm, that's a good indication that your heater core probably isn't getting enough coolant in it. So you should check your coolant level when your motor's cool. In my case, my motor's taking forever to warm up, and that's why it's staying cold inside of the truck. That's because I took my thermostat out. Thermostats are important, so I'm going to go ahead and put this back in now that it's cold outside. I took it out because in the summer I wasn't sure if I had a clogged radiator or not, or if I had a thermostat issue, even though that thermostat's pretty new. I replaced it at the same time I did my water pump. We'll talk about what the water pump looks like in a minute. I'll do that once we're installing this outside. But if that's your case, it's taken forever for your car to warm up. Maybe your thermostat is stuck open. Now, stuck thermostat can cause a couple of different issues. Overheating would be the most common, and that's where I'll get into in a different video. If your car is overheating, we'll talk about that in the future. Okay, here I have a blower motor resistor. Now, another problem that could happen in your vehicle is maybe your fan doesn't work, or in the case of my CR-V, maybe it only works on high. So we'll talk about the components inside the vehicle that might be causing an issue too, right after we do the thermostat. So the first thing I'd always recommend is make sure you're topped off with coolant. Always check that when your engine's cool. But if you start having some heating up issues, the first thing I would do is check your coolant level. That's the most important. If that looks good, consider the other components in the heating system. Okay, so here we are under the hood of my Ranger. Like I mentioned earlier, thermostats are important, so I don't recommend removing one like I did. In fact, vehicles aren't designed to run without a thermostat. In the case of mine, in most, the gasket's part of the thermostat, so when I took it out, I had to make my own gasket. I just used form a gasket on both sides and that worked. It held up for a few months because I, again, this was just a test, it was a diagnostic test that I did in the summer. And since it was on my own vehicle, I just didn't finish the test until now that it's winter. Now that it is winter though, the coolant in my engine is way too cold for the heat of the motor. It never gets all the way warm, and that can actually be a bad thing. Kind of like when water sizzles on a hot pan. And it just starts skipping around. It doesn't really transfer energy well. That's because the temperature difference is too high. What that means is when coolant is closer to the actual temperature of what it's trying to cool down, it transfers heat better. So if I run all winter with really cold coolant, that can actually be bad for the motor. It can actually overheat and never look like it. All right, so if you take a look right there, the shiny piece on the front of the motor, that's a new water pump. That could also cause some heating issues in your vehicle. The cooling fan is another important one. I actually replaced this when I replaced the water pump for that reason. And something else I've yet to mention that can cause some heating issues is airlock in the cooling system. So if you have been low on coolant recently, or if you've had it filled up recently, or for one reason or another, maybe there's air in your cooling system. In that case, you would have to bleed the air out of your system. You can do that maybe by jacking the front of the vehicle up super high or parking on a steep hill. My preferred method are these tall funnels that raise the cooling level to where, as I said earlier, the heater core is usually the highest thing in the cooling system. You see how high up that is? And the cap of the radiator is lower than that. On some vehicles, it's even more drastic. Well, this will raise that cooling level up past that. So make sure you're always doing an inspection underneath the hood of your vehicle once a month. Check the oil level and look for any sort of leaks. Check all your hoses. They shouldn't be collapsed. Your belt should be in nice shape as well. That could cause some overheating issues. If you do have air in your system and you can't get it out, you should just go to a mechanic. I mentioned earlier that if you have a clogged radiator, that could cause some issues. If that's the case, you might need to flush your radiator. I'm not recommending one thing or another, but this is what I put on to flush my radiator. I could hook a garden hose up to that and run the fluid through backwards. And that also flushed the heater core as well, since these are the lines going to the heater core. Okay, so let's go ahead. I've just got to open this up. There's 3 10mm bolts, and I'm going to clean up the gasket material that is on there that I made myself and put this old thermostat with its own gasket back in. Okay, that's where that thermostat should be, between here. Now when it comes to thermostats, if you've determined that you want to replace yours, the couple of things you need to know are there's one side with a spring that should go towards the motor, not towards the radiator, because that's what opens up whenever it gets hot, so that should get hot first. And if you have one of these little breather holes here, that should go towards the top. So if you line those two up, you'll pretty much get it right every time. Some thermostats do have a little notch in them though, and you can't mess them up when that's the case. All right, that's what it should look like. Let's go ahead and put this back together. All right, I've got that back together. It's time to get this topped off and to talk about the last couple of things. Okay, so some other issues you could run into with your heating system might be electronic. For example, in this car, the blower motor doesn't turn on until it's all the way in one position. Well, you could also have an issue where your blower motor doesn't work at all, no matter where it's at. You could also have an issue where the instrument panel just doesn't work. If that's the case, it's most likely your instrument panel. If it's the other two, let's go ahead and dig into it. All right, so I've got the glove compartment open. The blower motor's right here. The cabin filter's right here in this vehicle. And that would leave the evap and the heater core over here. When you run into issues with those, they get a lot more complicated. In most vehicles, you don't have to take anything apart to get to the air filter. The inside air filter called the cabin filter, and this one you do. Now, if you have issues with your blower motor, now we're looking at that. You can test the connector down there, I'll show you that. And right here is the resistor, that's what I'm gonna be replacing. If you notice that you only have a fan that comes out on one speed, that's most likely the resistor. Now the resistor is an electromagnetic coil and can hold a charge, so even after you unplug it, you need to be super careful when you're touching it. And in this case, to get to the resistor, I've got to take the blower motor out, so I'll show you how to do both. Okay, now if we look underneath the dash, we have the blower motor right here. And the blower motor has an electrical connector on it. If you suspect your blower motor is not working at all because it doesn't work on any speed, then you can take that connector off and test for power. If you have power and it's not working, then your blower motor is bad. If it doesn't have power, then check your relay or fuse. Okay, there's usually some sort of cover in the way of the blower motor you're gonna have to remove. I'm gonna take the blower motor all the way out again, but if you were testing it, here's that connector. And if there's just two pins like this, one should be power and one should be ground. And then there's usually a couple of screws, or you have to undo one screw maybe and then twist the thing clockwise or counterclockwise to unlock it. Now if you're doing the blower motor, that's all you gotta do. I'm gonna go do the resistor though, it comes out that hole. So I will undo these two screws here and drop it out. All right, just like the old one, just like the old one comes out, the new one goes in. This. Okay, so now that I've got this new resistor installed, let's clip it in. It should work on all speeds now. There you go. Alright, the wife's gonna love that. And if you ever just feel like you're overwhelmed, then that's the point where you'd seek the help of a professional mechanic. So let me know in the comments down below what you think about this video. Is there anything I missed? Or what's the most important thing that you should know about your car's heating system? Put that in the comments down below. If you like this video, you have to make sure you're subscribed and check out this video next. You can donate at the links in the description if you want to help out. I'll see you on the next episode. That's a job well done.